Boom. Okay, welcome aboard. Here we are. It is the Shabbos, the week before the fast of Tisha B'Av, and today's class will focus on an episode around the fast day. So let's take a look at what happens. Coming up is Tisha B'Av, the day that the Holy Temple was destroyed. One of the most detailed accounts of the war between the Romans and the Jews is the Jewish Wars. It's a book written by a fellow called Yosef ben Matisyahu, whose Roman name was Josephus Flavius. He was a Jewish general who deserted to the ranks of Titus. Many Jewish historians were of the opinion that Josephus is suspect of portraying the Romans in a better light due to his close relationship with them. However, the Rebbe writes in a letter that most secular critics condemn him. However, the religious praise him. They explain that he praised the Romans because he was in their captivity and highly regarded amongst them. But his real intention was he wanted to abolish the decrees against the Jews. Okay, Josephus says that when the war against Jerusalem was at its height, Titus called together a war cabinet to decide what should be done with the temple. Should it be destroyed or left standing? In fact, actually, one member of this secret cabinet, of this war cabinet, was a Jewish person whose father had donated the gold to plate the Holy Temple's gates. His own son was amongst those destroying Jerusalem. Some of the generals maintained that the Jews would never surrender as long as the temple stood. The war would only be decisively won if the temple would be thoroughly demolished. That's opinion number one. Others disagreed, and they said that the destroyed temple was not worthwhile for Roman public opinion. By leaving the temple erect, by leaving it intact, they would send the message that they had nothing against the Jewish religion and simply wanted to put down the rebellion. However, these advisors nevertheless added that if the Jews were using the temple as a fortress from where to fight the Romans, they wouldn't have a choice. They'd have to destroy the temple. And the fault, of course, lies with the Jews who were using the temple as a fortress. Titus closes the meeting by saying that he had no interest in punishing the beautiful edifice due to the sins of the people. Even if the Jews would use it as a fortress, he intended to preserve the temple. Destroying the temple would hurt Rome's reputation, but having an intact temple would glorify the Roman Empire. In the end, the Jews fought tooth and nail against the Roman legions from within and without the temple. In anger, one Roman soldier set fire to the building, and soon the entire building was destroyed. What I just read to you was actually from the account of Josephus. This is from his history book, and you should know, this is an important comment, that in the Talmud, in the Jewish texts, there is no corroborative sources. The rabbis do not tell us of any such piece of history, okay? Here we go. Let's take a look. Section A, the temple ablaze. We're going to take a look at source number 1 from Josephon, chapter 93. As discussed, this is the Jewish general who deserted the camp of Titus, and he is telling the story of the temple, which was destroyed in the year 70 after Common Era. So let's take a look. Who is going to read first? Let's get Carla. Will you please read for us? This is the first page. It's a full page, 4 paragraphs. Off you go.
Source 1. Roman ministers and advisors of Titus told him, "If you don't burn the building, you will never conquer this people. They are willing to die for it." Titus revealed his opinion that he would not take revenge on the temple, which is not a living being, for the sins of human beings, even if the Jews climb onto it to fight from it. Doing so would damage the Romans, while leaving the edifice standing would allow it to shine as a jewel in their crown. The next day, the Romans gathered and set fire to the temple. They took logs and set them upon the golden gates of the temple and lit them on fire. The gold heated up, the wood in the doors burned, and they collapsed. The temple and the Holy of Holies became open to all on the 9th day of the 5th month. The same day it was opened in the days of the Babylonians. When the Romans opened the gate to the temple and occupied it, a cry of joy erupted, and the fire surrounded the temple, slowly burning through it. The priests in the temple fought the Romans until they could no longer lift their arms in battle. When they realized that all was lost, they jumped and threw themselves into the fire that was raging in the temple. Many of the Jewish warriors hiding from the Romans perished in the holy fire along with the priests. They said, "Life is not worth living without the temple."
Thank you, Carla. So just as a comment, as an aside, pay attention to similarity between Titus's behavior and a similar enemy that we had in the past century. The Nazis were, Germany was the most advanced of nations, the most moral of people. Nevertheless, they managed to annihilate or attempt genocide of millions of people, not just Jews, millions of people, right? Similarly, Titus is saying, oh, this is a beautiful building. Let's keep the building, but let's get rid of whoever knows how many millions of people were killed then. And historians say that more people died in the destruction of the temple than were killed in the Holocaust, which is a fascinating piece of information. The priests who are fighting for the Temple Mount make a comment, life isn't worth living. What do you think life isn't worth living might mean to a Jew in the temple era? I'd like to open this to the group. Let's go. Reb Shmuel, please give us a comment if you've got one. You'll have to go off mute too. Anyone?
Yeah, I don't know. Of course, there's a basic, seems to be a violation of a basic principle or commandment to do oneself in, regardless of the circumstance.
To take one's own life seems to be a prohibition, and it actually is. Keep in mind, though, just so that we are clean and clear, most people today don't take their own life in clarity. A person who takes their own life nowadays is usually under immense pressure of some sort, right? In this case, why did these people say life isn't worth living? I'd rather be elsewhere. And Alan, do you have a comment for us?
No, I mean, my first thought was what Robert said about the prohibition. I guess my other thought would be, obviously, the significance of the temple. If God resided there, if that's the notion that this is where sort of God meets the people, I guess that's, sort of severs that tie in their minds.
Absolutely. I will go. Any more comments? Otherwise, I'm going to go just a bit deeper on what Alan said.
I would think that it was the center of their life. I mean, I would see it as you made the comment that those individuals in modern society who take their life are usually under some very specific duress, mental illness, or addictive behaviors. But I think this would have been a horribly immense spiritual duress if, like Alan said, you believe it's your connection, you believe it's your sole reason for being is to serve in this temple. To have it destroyed, I would think would just be such a personal affront that you wouldn't know how to handle it.
I love it. Thank you, Carla. And I'm going to go, Juan, go for it.
I think they thought it was the end of the Shekinah. So it was a painful day.
Okay, so it's a fateful day, and they're ready to give everything away because this is the end of life. So going along with Alan and Carla, a very similar notion, and similar to also what Juan is saying, is that for the Jew in the time of the temple, keeping in mind that it is said, the Talmud teaches us that a person could see God in the temple, could physically see God. Now, I cannot explain that, and if you find someone who can explain it, I advise you walk away. But the Talmud tells us that one could see God in the temple, could physically experience God. Now, what does that, in a way, the temple is the anchor, is the center of the Jewish lifestyle. And if you count the commandments, the 613 commandments, nearly 500 of them are dependent on the temple. Meaning, being a Jew is pretty simple nowadays. There's only like 82 biblical commandments left, or something like that, which means that most of the Jews' life in the time of the temple was extremely dependent on living on having a temple. And so seeing the temple go, it's like, for example, a person wakes up after a surgery and discovers that, God forbid, their legs have been amputated, both of them, and both arms are amputated, and he's lost his power of speech. This is a person who's now immobilized, who cannot do anything. Such a person, what is life worth living for him right now in his current situation? That's one way to look at it. Reb Shmuel, give us a comment, and then we move forward.
It's a double-edged sword, because I think the tradition tells us that the destruction was the result of the fact that the people essentially desecrated the temple and committed the three cardinal sins that led to and ignored all of the prophecies, leading up to the destruction. So they to say, to act shocked and to say that now life is not worth living, they kind of had made a choice. Again, according to, I gather, what the tradition says, they had made this choice already that they weren't going to live that life.
I'm with you. So solution number one is that the people who had already made that choice to leave the tradition were already gone. Wherever they were, maybe they'd already been annihilated, or maybe they weren't included in this rebellion. Maybe they were so assimilated that they weren't considered part of this rebellion. Mm-hmm. When the Germans took the Jews, they didn't differentiate between affiliation. You could be married out, and they still were going to chop that Jew, right? Yeah. And so it's an interesting comment, right? Nevertheless, here we've got how this is the center of their life, and it's been taken away. And so they say, is it worth living to live like this? Let's move on to source number 2. Source number 2 is from Tractate Tainit. It's from the Talmud, and it tells us of the series of events that brought to the ultimate destruction of the temple. And so on the 7th, Gentiles entered the sanctuary and ate and desecrated with fornication on the 7th and the 8th. Before nightfall on the 9th, they set it on fire and they burned for a full 24 hours. Like this says, woe unto us, for the day has declined, for the shadows of the evening are stretched out. Oy lonu ki pana ayoim ki yinotu tzilulei erev. By the way, someone who reads the liturgy on Rosh Hashanah, or maybe it's Yom Kippur, will remember these 3 words, Kipona Hayoim, features in the liturgy of Yom Kippur in the Ne'ilah prayer, just as a digression. This is the meaning of Rabbi Yochanan's statement, had I lived in that generation, I would have established the fast on the 10th, because most of the sanctuary was burned on that day. But the sages felt that marking the beginning of the tragedy was preferable. This is a disagreement. There is an argument here. Which day is the harshest day of the destruction? Is it the 9th day or the 10th day? There is an argument. Rabbi Yochanan says it's the 10th day. And the rabbis, the sages as a group, argued with him and said it's actually the 9th day because that's when the tragedy began. And that's why we make an emphasis. Of course, you cannot fast 48 hours in one shot. And so they have to choose one day. And then in source number 3 and source number 4, we discover when do we make most of the practices. So source number 3 shows that it's actually that you do everything on the 9th day, but things begin to become easier throughout the afternoon. So, for example, from the evening, from Saturday night until Sunday early afternoon, the halachic midday, which is going to be around 1:30 or so, we're not meant to sit on full high chairs because we are in a state of mourning. When a person is in Shiva, they sit on a low stool. The same thing on Tisha B'Av, we sit on a low stool. By the way, if you're driving, you're allowed to sit on your chair. You're allowed to sit in the driver's seat. Don't worry about it, okay? But however, what you will notice is that in the afternoon, you're allowed to sit up on a regular chair, okay? Moving forward in source 4, the Ramah is the Ashkenazi chief commentator on the Shulchan Aruch, says that on the Code of Jewish Law, he says that when do you make the special prayer of Tisha B'Av, which is called Menachem, consolation. You say this only in the afternoon, which is the beginning already of the consolation. Hold on a second. You guys should all be asking out loud, why does the consolation begin on the 9th in the afternoon when the worst is about to come? It's happening. The worst happens on the 10th. Why the consolation here? Let's take a brief break from this part of the conversation to take a look at the prayer. Source number 5, the prayer called Nachem, the prayer of consolation. And I will ask Juan, if you will please read for us source number 5.
Console, Adonai, our God, those who mourn for Zion, those who mourn for Jerusalem and the city that is in mourning and ruins, spices and desolated. Mourning because she is bereft of her children, ruin of the dwelling, spices in the loss of her glory, desolate without inhabitants. She sits in her head, covered in shame, like a barren woman who never gave birth. Legends have devoured her. Idolater have possessed her. They threw your people Israel to the sword and wantonly murder the fierce one of the Most High. Therefore, Zion weeps bitterly, and Jerusalem writes her voice. Oh, my heart breaks for their slain. Oh, my inner's age for their slain. For you, or Adonai consume her with the fire, and with the fire you will reveal her. As it is said, it will be to her said, Adonai has surrounded wall of fire, and I will be for glory within her midst. Blessed are you, Adonai, who console Zion and rebuild Jerusalem.
Thank you, Juan. Okay, so we move on. This is the end of section A, and as I promised, let's get some feedback. Anyone with a comment before we hop into section 2? Comments or questions? Okay, off we go. Section 2, the Arizal's question. Here we go. And who is the Arizal? So the Arizal is one of the latter, most important Kabbalists. He lived, I'm guessing here, in like the 14th century or so. and you can Google that, of course. And he lived in Tzfat, in Safed. He lived a very short life. I'm pretty sure it was something like 34 years. During that time, he established many students and great students like Rabbi Chaim Vital and others. These are Kabbalists who I cannot compete with their knowledge. But we accept the writings that they have as 100% true and as very deep, that needs to be studied and dissected and understood letter by letter, word for word. And we're going to study something from this thing. It's also nice to note that this week, on the 5th day of Av, which is today is number 7, I think. No, today is number 6. Yesterday was number 5. On the 5th day of Av is the passing day of the Arizal, who is buried in Tzfat, and I had the honor of visiting his burial site about a decade ago. And when we one day make a rural Georgia trip to Israel, we will stop at his burial site, and that's a promise. Okay, so here we go. Let's get, who's next? Let's get Alan. Will you please read for us source number 6?
On Tisha B'Av, it is customary to recite verses of comfort during the afternoon prayer, and it is also customary to get up and sit normally on benches. But it would seem from the Babylonian Talmud that the temple was set aflame only in the evening of Tisha B'Av. It would seem appropriate to mourn in the afternoon more than the morning.
Thank you, Alan. Let's get Diana. Will you please read for us the first section from the Rebbe? This is 1, 2, 3 paragraphs introducing the question.
Second, I have to unmute myself. Okay. The Rebbe, joy on Tisha B'Av. It is customary to recite the Menachem prayer during the afternoon services on Tisha B'Av. However, this raises a question. Why was the prayer designated for the afternoon service and not for the morning or prior evening? It seems counterintuitive. The burning of the temple began on 9 Av towards evening. The Talmud says before nightfall on the 9th, they set it on fire. The Talmud even tells us about a proposal to set the fast day on the 10th. But most of the sanctuary was burned on that day. Why then do we recite the prayer of Menachem, a message of solace, specifically in the afternoon prayer? Do you want me to continue?
Please, another 2 paragraphs.
Okay. The Arizal giving a beautiful answer in Shir HaChavanot when they saw the temple begin to burn. The people recited hymns and rejoiced. Why did this occur? Not on the anniversary of the destruction, but at the very moment the temple was set on fire. It was during the worst moment of the tragedy, not during the 9 days prior, nor during the 3 weeks prior, nor the 10th of Tevet, when the city was besieged and ultimately destroyed. But as they watched the temple burn, at that moment, the people recite hymns and rejoiced.
Thank you, Diana. So we left with a question. The question is, why are the people rejoicing right here at the moment where the temple is destroyed? This is absurd. And we're going to enter into the answer almost immediately. The book, the Arizal wrote this in the book called Shar HaKavanot, the Gate of Intention. Okay, and that is where where this comes from. So let's go back to the beginning, and we'll ask Carla. Carla, will you read for us the destruction revealed, the love, and take 3 paragraphs? Have
I
you
can
got
get
it?
my fingers to work. I certainly would be happy to.
Excellent.
All right. Here we go. The Arizal explains in Shar HaKavanot that the issue can be understood based on a teaching in the Talmud. There is a hymn in Psalms which Asaph recited during the destruction. Why a hymn and not a dirge? The Talmud explains that at the outset, the enemies wanted to kill the Jewish people. The Jews thought they would never recover from the blow. They would be annihilated by the sword of the enemy. When they saw the flames on the temple on the afternoon of 9 Av, they rejoiced and sang a hymn. They found solace because if God would not have spent his fury on the sticks and stones, he would have done so on the people. As our sages said, he vented his fury and kindled a flame in Jerusalem. In other words, the burning of the temple revealed how beloved the Jewish people are to God. Even in the lowest spiritual state, where God is forced to destroy the temple, even for fun, he did not threaten the existence of the Jewish people out of his great love for them. Therefore, even when the heavenly court rules that God should unleash his fury, the ruling is expressed on sticks and stones. The Jewish people themselves, as the Talmud says, my arrows will run out, but they will not run out. The existence of the people of Israel is eternal. This was revealed the moment the fire was lit and the temple was set ablaze. Because this was the moment we reached rock bottom. Until that moment, we couldn't possibly know what God would do when the situation deteriorated. But when we hit rock bottom, God was, so to speak, forced to set the temple on fire. That is when his essential love for the Jewish people was revealed. We realized that even in the worst possible situation, our existence is eternal because God loves us so.
Thank you, Carla. So think about a gambler. A gambler comes to the casino with a lot of cash, and when is the gambler finally free of all of his urge? In a way, it's only when he runs out of money to spend. Similarly, the joke is told of a Jewish peddler, a wealthy fellow who lived in the shtetl, and the cycle went around and the circle went down, and his life got harder. He lost all his money and he lost all of his possessions until all he had was the clothes on his back. Finally, the week is over and it's time to take a bath before Shabbat. So he heads over to the local, to the bathhouse. He gets into the bathhouse, he undresses himself, takes a rinse, he comes out and he's ready to get dressed. And what does he discover? Someone has ripped off his last belongings. He doesn't have clothes anymore. Standing there in the dressing room, he realizes he's got nothing left. So he starts to dance the horror. And he dances and he celebrates. And now all the onlookers are thinking, wow, Yankel's finally lost it. Life is so tough. He's probably gone crazy. So they raise a couple cents, they buy him another pair of pants, another shirt, and they send him home. Years pass, and Yankel's situation starts to improve. He's got a couple more dollars. He goes into a business deal. Things are getting better. Things are looking up. One smart fellow says, hey, now it's a good time to look into this guy. He goes over to Yankel and he says, Yankel, we thought you were crazy last year. You were dancing naked in the mikveh. Now suddenly you're doing well. Yankel responds, I knew at that point that it could not get worse. That was it. I had hit rock bottom, and here I am. I've only gotten better from here. And perhaps this is what happened at the time of the temple. Why were the people rejoicing? Because they knew that was it. It's over now. There's nothing. What could get worse? Another reason for celebration, which is the one the Rebbe tells us, is now that we're here, we're at this rock bottom, we're also quite sure about how God is going to deal with us as a nation. Until now, we could have said maybe God prefers the temple, and so we'll get rid of his people. But now that we see that God did away with his own temple, we can be sure that we as a nation are here to stay. And that is the lesson that we're taking from this part of the Sikha. Let's take a look, source number 7, 8, and source number 7 and 8. The Medrash Medrash Rabbah on Eicha brings a parable to explain this whole conversation. It's a first of all, take a look in the second paragraph. He says a hymn by Asaph. Asaph was a prophet and one of the authors in the Tehillim, and he writes a mizmor. He writes a song about the destruction of the temple. So everybody wants to know, why is he singing? So the Medrash brings this story, and he says that there's a king who was getting ready to marry off his son. And then he hears that his son has started making trouble. He's gone in the wrong direction. So the king goes over to the chuppah and he breaks it. He destroys it. So everybody looks around. What's happening? The tutor of the son is playing his flute. He's singing. He's celebrating. Says the people to the tutor, "Why are you celebrating? The king is so upset. The son, your student, has gone off and done bad things." And so the teacher says, "Now I know that the son is more valuable to the father, to the king, than all of his wealth and all of his items. The fact that he doesn't kill the child, instead he destroys the chuppah, the canopy and the celebratory parts of the celebration, well, that tells me that the child is more important." And so the last paragraph of source 7, take a look. So too they said to Asaph, "God has destroyed the temple and you sit and sing." He said to them, "I sing because God vented his fury on sticks and stones and did not vent his fury on Israel. As it is written, he has kindled a fire in Zion, which has consumed her foundations. God did not hurt us as a nation, rather he took away his building." Take a look at source 8, an interesting digression. Who is the author of this Medrash Rabbah comment? It comes from a fellow called Avimi. So Rabbi Abahu said, "Avimi, my son, properly fulfilled the mitzvah of honoring his parents." What's the story? He had many sons, and the father once knocked on his door, and the child said, "I'm coming, I'm coming." And he kept on calling, "I'm coming," until he got to the door as a sign of honor to his father. One day, Rabbi Abahu said to his son, "Please bring me water." So the son goes and gets him water. In the meanwhile, Rabbi Abahu fell asleep. So what would you do if your dad asked you for a drink and then he fell asleep? You'd leave the drink and you'd go away. You'd continue doing what you were doing. Who knows how long he's going to sleep for? This son, he stood by his father's table until his father woke up, and he gave him the water as soon as he woke up. It's at this moment, while he's waiting, in the merit of his honoring his dad, that God blessed him with a breath of Ruach HaKodesh, of divine inspiration, and he was able to get this understanding, this new understanding of the verse Mizmor LaAsaf, which tells us about the destruction and how really it's a celebration of God is keeping us as a people and instead taking the temple, the building. And here we conclude section B. And so I open the floor to comments and questions before we head on to section C, source 9. Comments and questions? Oh, Alan.
That's a pretty impressive attitude. I got to tell you, that's, you know, if someone said, I hate you, I'm going to burn down your house, I'm not so sure I'd be dancing.
But at least you'd be happy that you were alive.
Also true. It's
So-
still a pretty good psychological leap.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so it's important to point out that, of course, there is the suffering and the pain of the destruction of our temple, right? And we don't dance on the 9th of Av. There is no dancing and singing. We don't feast. We fast. We cry. We mourn. Nevertheless, there is another perspective which we're discussing right now. And it's just it's another twist to it, right? This is something edible and tangible that when somebody says to you, what's the happy part of Tisha B'Av? You can turn around and say, now I know. The happy part of Tisha B'Av is that here I am. Here we are as a nation, even though we earned what we got. God forbid, shouldn't happen to the Jewish people ever. The heavens should spare us from such troubles. Nevertheless, here we are. And God didn't vent his anger on us, instead on the temple. Let's take a look at section C, unless, Alan, you had another question.
Yeah, so I guess it was the Romans, they didn't go out there and start killing the Jews. They let them live.
The kinos, the prayers, and I don't know what you say. I don't know how to translate kinos in English. These prayers that we say on Tisha B'Av, it's a book of Kinnis, tell us about blood flowing like a river in the city of Jerusalem. So there definitely was absolute murder. There was a lot of not goodness happening. It wasn't just the destruction of the temple. And yeah, like similar to what Robert said before, the people also suffered. Everyone suffered, and then the rest of the people were taken in chains. So it wasn't like it was a hunky-dory, okay, we'll just kill all these people and destroy the temple. No, it was heavy. It was heavy. Let's take a look.
Rabbi,
yes.
Rabbi, just one quick comment. Another reason why perhaps they rejoiced is that this is actually a fulfillment of a prophecy in the Torah. At the end of the Tochacha, the curses, after all those horrible curses, Hashem says something to the effect that despite all this, you will continue. I will be with you. And so what was going on around them, yeah, the building is being destroyed, everything is going to pieces, but they saw that in the end, the people would in some fashion survive, which indeed has been the case over thousands of years.
Absolutely, 100%. And here we go into source 9, and this is going to be the cherubs intertwined. This is a conversation of the cheruvim, which is in English, I think it's pronounced the cherubs, and if it's not, please correct me. What is the cherubs? So the center of the temple was the ark, the holy ark, and the top of it, the lid, was designed to have two angelic features, one a boy and one a girl. And we're told that when the Jewish people were in God's favor, the angelic sculptures, call them, faced each other. And when they were not in God's favor, when God was upset at the people, they turned their backs to each other. And so we're going to read a section from the Talmud which tells us about them. Let's take a look, and I'm going to ask Reb Shmuel, please read for us source 9.
Okay, here we go. How did the cherubs stand? Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar. One says they faced each other, and one says they were back to back, facing the walls of the sanctuary. But according to the one who says they faced each other, we must ask, isn't it written, and their faces were toward the house? This is not difficult. Here it speaks of when the Jewish people were doing the will of God, and there it speaks of when the Jewish people were not doing the will of God.
Thank you. And so off we go, Talmud Tractate Yoma. Yoma is the chapter, by the way, we just finished it in the daily study of the Talmud. in the Daf Yomi cycle. It is the tractate which discusses the holiday of Yom Kippur, and all the laws of Teshuvah are discussed in this tractate as well. Rabbi Katina relates that when the Jewish people would make the festival pilgrimage, the Kohanim would open the doors of the sanctuary and the curtain of the Holy of Holies, so the people would be able to see the cherubs intertwined with each other to see for themselves God's love for the people. Let's take a look. Can we get Alan? Please, can you read for us source 10?
Rabbi Katina said when the Jewish people would make pilgrimage for the festivals, the curtains would be rolled up for them and they would be shown the cherubs, which were intertwined with each other. They would be told, "See how you are beloved before God, like the love of a male and female." The verse says the cherubs were Kimara Ish Biliyot. What does that mean? Rabbi Bar Rav Shila said, like a man intertwined with his mate. Reish Lakish said, when the Gentiles entered the sanctuary, they saw the cherubs intertwined with one another. They took them out to the market and said, "These Jews whose blessing is a blessing and whose curse is a curse, should they be occupied with such matters?" They immediately destroyed the cherubs, as it is stated, "All who honored her debase her because they have seen her nakedness."
Thank you, Alan. So we have a Talmud which tells us of how the cherubs were facing each other even at the moment when the temple was destroyed. And what happens is the conquerors enter the sanctuary, they take out the cherubs, and they say, "Look at this." Okay, what do we have with this? We find a similar expression in the Talmud. When the Gentiles entered the sanctuary, they saw the cherubs intertwined with one another. At the time of the destruction, the cherubs were intertwined with each other, which is an indication of God's unmitigated closeness and love for the Jewish people, where we are one entity. So what do we have? That really the Jewish people, at that ultimate moment of destruction of the temple, and we think God is upset at us, take a look, in what direction are the cherubs facing? They're looking at each other. They're close to each other, like husband and wife. This tells you how much God loved us at that moment that the temple was destroyed. People like to say, "Oh, God, where was God? Where was he?" God is with you. God was with them. God is with each of us. And even in our time of suffering, it's hard to say that God is doing it to punish. There is a certain Greek god who is known to strike with lightning. Judaism doesn't talk like that at all, ever. There isn't punishment and destruction. There is, it happens, but it's not because of hate, it's not because of anger. It's God. At the same time, somehow God loves us. The fact that God poured his wrath on the temple's physical edifice is the greatest proof of how much he loves his people. Despite the disappointment, despite that the Jews did not follow what they were told to do, despite their violation of the 3 cardinal sins, God directs his anger at the temple, allowing him to preserve the Jewish people. In another Farbrengen, another Sicha, which is brought, I don't know what page it is for you in the student book, but it should be the last page. The Rebbe continues this conversation. Just a week later, the Rebbe makes another comment on the same thing, and he says that the Arizal continues in that original comment. Remember, we read the Arizal. So now he continues, and he says, in my humble opinion, there is another answer which I heard from my father regarding why we loosen up the morning in the afternoon. That was the question. Now Arizal wants to know why does the morning loosen up on the 9th when really the worst part is right now. Says the Arizal, on Tisha B'Av afternoon, the Mashiach was born, and his name is Menachem, like it says in Medrash Eicha. So the Rebbe makes the comment that it's, number one, it's noteworthy for children who are born on Tisha B'Av to have that name, Menachem. And there's actually someone in our group whose father's name is Menachem. But that aside, you can see how in the moment of destruction, at the harshest moment, is a time of consolation. Menachem, like Nachem, means to console. So you see how in the 9th of Av, in the afternoon, we're already feeling up. We're already getting better. Because here is a point where God says, you're my children, and I'm going to lift you, and I'm going to make you, and I'm going to help you be a better, I'm going to lift you up. And so this is my blessing for us all of us present and every Jew in the world. Let us find the blessings in our suffering. Let us recognize, let us have the wisdom to recognize how God is taking care of us, how God is with us, even in our time of destruction. I wish you all a good Shabbos and a meaningful Tisha B'Av, hopefully together with Mashiach in the Holy Temple.
Thank you, Rabbi.